The air inside the auction hall of Xiphos 9 reeked of blood, sweat, and something more primal, fear. Cages lined the circular stage, each one housing a different kind of nightmare. Some creatures snarled and snapped at the bars, massive, muscled beasts engineered for war. Others lay still, their eyes hollow, their wills already broken. A crowd of warlords, mercenaries, and black market elites gathered beneath the flickering hololights. Their voices mingled with the buzz of shifting currency and quiet bets, calculating which creature would kill the most, last the longest, or bring the highest profit. Ethan Vale leaned against the rusted railing of the upper balcony, arms crossed. His dark coat was patched, his boots scuffed, and his demeanor uninterested. He wasn't here for the blood sport. He was here to steal something back from a galaxy that had forgotten mercy. A deep, synthetic voice echoed through the speakers. The auctioneer. Ladies and gentlemen, sentients and savages, we begin the bidding with something truly exquisite. A Dravkan, fully matured, battle-scarred, but still full of fight. A worthy addition to any war fleet. A hulking beast was dragged onto the stage. It resembled the dragons of old Earth legends, but with scales that shimmered in the dim light, shifting like liquid metal. Its amber eyes burned with hate as thick, black chains bound its wings. Opening bid, 50,000 credits. The warlords raised their hands without hesitation. Numbers climbed quickly, a game for the rich, their voices filled with anticipation for violence. Ethan's gaze barely flicked toward it. He wasn't here for that one. He kept watching as the bidding continued. Dravkan after Dravkan were paraded out, one stronger than the last. Some still bared their fangs, refusing to bow. Others had long since accepted their fate. It was sickening. Then, the last cage was dragged forward. The moment the crowd saw its contents, laughter erupted. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his tone almost mocking. And finally, for those looking for sentimental value, we present the runt. The cage door opened with a mechanical hiss. A small, battered Dravkan lay at the bottom. Its once golden scales were dull and cracked, covered in deep scars. One wing was torn, barely attached. Its ribs jutted out, a clear sign of starvation. When the handler prodded it with an electrostick, it didn't even flinch. By the stars, it's already half dead, someone jeered. What's the point? It wouldn't even last a round in the pits. Put it out of its misery and sell the bones. Ethan felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. He had seen enough war to know what true suffering looked like. This wasn't just a wounded animal. This was a creature that had given up. The auctioneer chuckled. Shall we start at 100 credits? The room fell silent. No one moved. No hands were raised. Even among butchers and slavers, this thing wasn't worth the effort. Ethan pushed off the railing. I'll take it. Silence. Heads turned toward him. Some with amusement. Some with disbelief. A voice drawled from the shadows. Deep, smooth, carrying the weight of absolute confidence. Vorak the Black Sun. The warlord sat on a throne of iron and carnage, his cybernetic hand resting on the hilt of a blade that had ended empires. He was watching Ethan with something between mockery and curiosity. The human wants the runt? Vorak mused. His bioluminescent implants flickered with amusement. This should be entertaining. Ethan ignored him. His eyes were locked on the Dravkan. The auctioneer blinked. Very well. Sold, for 100 credits. The transaction was processed. Ethan stepped forward as the handlers unlocked the cage. They hesitated, expecting the Dravkan to lunge, but it didn't move. It was too weak to care. Ethan knelt beside it. Up close, the damage was worse than he thought. Its breathing was shallow, its eyes dull. It was young, barely more than a hatchling compared to the others. He reached out. Slowly. For the first time, the creature reacted. Its eyes flicked toward him. And in his mind, a voice, weak, broken, but still there. Why? Ethan exhaled, his fingers barely brushing against the rough scales. Because no one else will. The Dravkan's gaze lingered on him. Then, with a sigh that sounded almost relieved, it collapsed against him. The trip back to Ethan's ship was uneventful. Vorek's men made no move to stop him, too busy enjoying the hilarious waste of money. As he carried the half-conscious dragon through the docking bay, a voice chimed in over his comms. "You're either the dumbest human in the sector, or the most stubborn." Ethan smirked. "Would you believe both?" The voice belonged to Rivik, his closest ally, an ex-smuggler turned mechanic, waiting aboard Ethan's ship, the Ironclad. "More like suicidal," Rivik muttered. "That thing isn't going to survive the night, Vale." Ethan glanced down at the creature in his arms. It wasn't struggling. It wasn't even trying to escape. It was just resting. "We'll see." The Ironclad was old, patched together from stolen parts and half-legal upgrades, but it was home. The moment Ethan stepped inside, the ship's AI chirped an alarm. "Warning, unregistered organic detected." "Override," Ethan said. "Passenger confirmed." The ship's systems accepted the input, but not without a pause. Rivik was waiting in the main hold, arms crossed. The moment he saw the Dravkan, he let out a low whistle. "Damn. It's even worse up close." Ethan ignored him and carried the dragon to the cargo bay, clearing a space among the old crates. He set it down carefully, grabbing a med kit from a nearby shelf. The creature didn't move. For a long moment, Ethan just stood there, watching it breathe. "You really think it's going to make it?" Rivik asked quietly. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt beside the Dravkan, brushing a hand over its battered wing. Its eyes fluttered open. The voice in his head returned, barely more than a whisper. "What happens now?" Ethan exhaled. "Now," he murmured. "Now, we see what's left of you." The Ironclad hummed with the quiet rhythm of deep space travel. Outside, the endless black of the void stretched on, but inside, all that mattered was the dying creature in the cargo bay. Ethan Vale sat cross-legged beside the Dravkan, watching its slow, shallow breaths. The glow of the ship's overhead lights cast sharp shadows across its battered body. Every scar, every broken scale, every unhealed wound told a story of suffering. He had seen it before. The ones left to die. Rivik stood at the entrance, arms crossed. "This thing's not gonna make it, Ethan." His voice was neutral, but the undertone was clear. "Why are you putting yourself through this?" Ethan didn't look up. "We'll see." The dragon stirred slightly, its tail twitching. Not from strength, from pain. Rivik exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Look, I get it. You want to save things. Fix things. But this? This isn't salvage. It's a corpse waiting to happen." Ethan ignored him. He reached for the medical kit beside him, popping the latch with a flick of his fingers. The ship had basic supplies, but nothing designed for a Dravkan. He pulled out a sterilizer and began cleaning the wounds one by one. The creature shuddered. Its golden eyes cracked open, dull and unfocused. Ethan paused. "Still with me?" A weak breath. A flicker of something in those eyes, confusion. Then, a voice in his head, barely more than a whisper. "Why?" Ethan exhaled. "Because you deserve a chance." The Dravkan didn't reply. Maybe it didn't believe him. Maybe it just didn't have the strength. Rivik shook his head. 12 days, Vale. That's all it's got. Ethan didn't argue. Because he wasn't sure Rivik was wrong. Day 3, a fading light. The dragon refused to eat. Ethan tried everything, nutrient paste, liquid sustenance, even strips of raw meat. Nothing. It wouldn't open its mouth, wouldn't move beyond the occasional shift of its tail. By the 3rd day, its breathing hadn't improved. Ethan sat beside it, one knee bent, a ration bar in his hand. He took a bite, watching as its gaze flickered toward the sound. Not hunger, curiosity. He broke off a piece and placed it near its snout. Try it. Nothing. Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. You give up, you prove them right. The Dravkin didn't react. Rivik's voice crackled over the ship's comm. I'm running numbers. At this rate, it won't last another week. Ethan clenched his jaw. I know. A pause. Then, softer, I'm sorry, man. Ethan stared at the creature's slow, ragged breathing. Not yet. Day 6, the breaking point. The first sign of change came in the middle of the night. Ethan had fallen asleep on the floor of the cargo bay, arms crossed over his chest, his head resting against a crate. He woke to movement. A weak shuffle. The soft scrape of claws against metal. His eyes snapped open. The Dravkin had shifted, barely, but enough. Its snout was inches from the piece of food he'd left behind. Not eaten. But noticed. Ethan sat up, voice low. You still in there? A flicker of golden light in its eyes. It wasn't much. But it was something. Day 9, the first word. The dragon ate. Barely anything, but it ate. Ethan caught the motion out of the corner of his eye while cleaning his sidearm. The creature's jaws parted just enough to take a single bite. He didn't move. Didn't react. Let it happen. Then, after a long silence, the Dravkin spoke. I was strong once. The voice wasn't external. It rang in his head, like a thought that wasn't his own. Telepathic. Ancient. Ethan set his gun down. You still are. The dragon exhaled, slow and weak. No. Not anymore. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You think strength is just teeth and claws? A pause. Then, yes. Ethan shook his head. That's what they want you to think. The Dravkin's eyes flickered. Something changed. Not a lot. Just enough. Day 12, a name. By the 12th day, the Dravkin could stand. Barely. Ethan watched from the cargo bay entrance, arms crossed. The creature's legs trembled, but it held its own weight. A few seconds. Then longer. Then, the voice in his head. I remember my name. Ethan arched an eyebrow. Oh yeah? The Dravkin lifted its head. Its eyes were brighter now. Not full strength. Not yet. But alive. They called me Ashmarin. The name carried weight. A whisper of something lost. Forgotten. Ethan nodded. All right, Ashmarin. You ready to prove them wrong? The dragon's tail flicked. A hint of what it once was. I am ready to try. And for the first time since the auction, Ethan smiled. The ironclad drifted through the abyss of deep space, a lone speck against an ocean of stars. Inside, the quiet hum of the ship's engines was the only sound, until the alarms erupted. Incoming hostile signatures. Multiple vessels. Ethan Vale shot upright from the pilot's seat, his instincts kicking in before his thoughts caught up. His fingers danced over the console, bringing up the holo display. 5 ships. Warlord class. Vorax men. Rivik's voice crackled over the comm. We've got company. Looks like Vorak got tired of waiting for your pet to die. Ethan's jaw clenched. He turned toward the cargo bay. 12 days. That was all he and the dragon had. Not enough time. He moved fast, boots striking the metal floor as he reached the bay doors. Inside, Ashmarin was awake, standing, but barely. His golden scales, though brighter, still bore the scars of neglect. His wings, one still torn, one barely functional, twitched at the sound of the sirens. Ethan stopped in front of him. They're here. Ashmarin's eyes locked onto his. A quiet understanding passed between them. How many? 5 warships, Ethan said. Vorax done watching. He wants you back. Wants me dead. Ashmarin exhaled, the faintest curl of smoke escaping his nostrils. Then he will be disappointed. The dragon took a step forward, and nearly collapsed. His body wasn't ready. Ethan caught him, steadying his weight. You're still healing. I do not need to be whole. I need to be willing. The ship shook, the first warning shot. Vorak's voice came over the comms, smooth and mocking. Ethan Vale. You've wasted enough time on that thing. Hand it over, and I might let you live. Ethan turned, pressing a finger against his earpiece. Not happening. A pause. Then. You're protecting a failure. Ethan's expression darkened. Funny. That's exactly what I thought about you. Vorak's amusement vanished. Kill them both. The first strike. The ship lurched as the first wave of attacks slammed into the shields. Ethan sprinted back to the cockpit, skidding into his seat. Revik's voice was already shouting through the comm. Shields down to 60%. We can't take this kind of beating. Ethan's fingers flew over the controls. The ironclad wasn't a warship, it wasn't built to fight. It was a runner, a survivor. But so was Ethan. Revik, get to the turrets. I need cover fire. On it. Another blast rocked the ship. The ironclad twisted through space, dodging the worst of the barrage, but the enemy ships were relentless. Too many. Too fast. Ethan's grip tightened on the controls. They wouldn't make it. Not unless something changed. His eyes flicked toward the cargo bay camera feed. Ashmurn was still struggling to stand. Not enough time. Not enough strength. Ethan swallowed hard. Ashmurn, listen to me. You don't have to fight. You don't have to. The dragon cut him off, his voice stronger than before. I was born to be more than this. And then, he moved. The awakening. The ship groaned as Ashmurn reached the airlock. His body trembled, but his eyes burned, brighter than before. Ethan ran after him. What the hell are you doing? Ending this. The dragon slammed his tail against the panel, overriding the system. The airlock hissed. The void waited beyond. Ethan's heart pounded. You can't even fly. Ashmurn turned his head slightly, golden eyes locking onto his. Then I will fall with purpose. And with that, he leapt into space. Ethan barely had time to process it. One moment, the dragon was inside the ship, the next, he was hurtling toward the enemy fleet. And then. Something changed. The void bent around him. His body convulsed, golden energy cracking along his form. The scars that marked him, the wounds that should have held him back, they shattered like dead skin. A blast of energy erupted outward. Ashmurn's body expanded, his wings stretching, his broken form reforging itself mid-flight. What had once been a dying creature now burned with something else entirely. A force the galaxy had not seen in centuries. Terror in the warlord's fleet. On the bridge of the lead warship, Vorak rose from his seat. His cybernetic fingers clenched the armrest as his officers scrambled around him. Sir, one of them stammered. The Dravkan, something's happening. Vorak's eyes narrowed. On the screen before him, the dragon wasn't falling anymore. He was rising. This is impossible. Then, the warship's sensors screamed with warnings. A wave of golden fire erupted from the Dravkan's wings, racing toward the nearest ship. A moment later, the vessel was gone, reduced to molten wreckage. Panic spread through the fleet. That thing was supposed to be dead. It's not dead. It's a damn god. Vorak gritted his teeth. No. It's just a beast. But even he didn't believe it. The final stand. Ethan watched, his heart hammering. Ashmurn was something else now. Something untouched by time. He spoke, and his voice carried through the ship's systems, through the vacuum itself. You called me weak. The remaining warships opened fire, desperate to bring him down. Ashmurn moved. Faster than light. faster than thought. His claws sliced through metal. His fire turned armor to slag. The battlefield became a graveyard in seconds. Ethan had never seen anything like it. By the time the last enemy ship fell silent, only Vorak's flagship remained. Ashmurn hovered before it, golden fire dancing along his scales. You laughed when he bought me. Do you laugh now? Silence. Then Vorak did the only thing left. He ran. The flagship turned, engines flaring. A retreat. A surrender. Ashmurn let him go. He turned instead, flying back toward the ironclad. Back to Ethan. As he landed, his massive form shrinking just enough to fit the ship's bay, his golden eyes locked onto Ethan's. 12 days ago, I was waiting to die. Ethan exhaled. And now? A flicker of something deep within those eyes. Now, the galaxy will remember me. Ethan grinned. Damn right it will. And for the first time in a long, long time, a Dravkin was free.